Welcome back to today's Cybersecurity and Rapid Response, sponsored by RSA Security on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Fornicola, and my guest today is Matt McCormick, Chief Technology Officer of RSA's Global Public Sector. Matt, let's talk about once an organization is breached. What do they do from there?
So that's one of the biggest challenges today, and you're seeing, because of the amount of breaches that are going on, you're able to observe, and there's a lot of psychology that goes on in there. There's a lot of aspects to a breach that aren't technical anymore. For years, if there was a breach that was detected, we would try to handle it in-house. You didn't want information on the breach getting out, you're going to try to handle it with internal people. The game has really changed significantly over the last couple years, due, number one, to the fact that there are so many going on, but number two, it's next to impossible to hide them. There are certain websites out there that are dedicated to actually saying these organizations have been breached. It's very hard to keep that information inside. Obviously, for years, we tried to do them ourselves. There has been an acceptance in the industry now that there's nothing wrong with calling in an expert. There's nothing wrong with calling in somebody who does this every day. I like to say you can take out your own appendix by watching a YouTube video, I'm sure. I wouldn't recommend it, right? You go to a doctor who does it every day, all day. And so when you look at a modern breach response, whether it's federal or whether it's commercial, there are certain things you need. Number one, follow certain principles. Don't put out little bits of information. Put out accurate information when you have it and make sure it's truthful, because there's lots of organizations and lots of people who will then dive into that to try to see if you're not. If you are in the commercial sector, you are also going to bring in a public affairs firm. Why? Because you want to protect your stock price. Oftentimes you see after companies are breached, you'll see their stock go down. The ability to handle a breach professionally and to show a face to your organization that shows competence protects your stock price. In the government sector, you don't have the stock price issue, but you do have a perception of confidence. You need to see that government agency as handling the breach competently. And now you'll see with some of these large federal breaches, they have called in some of the external commercial breach specialists. There's lots of tools, so you have to have your tool capability. You have to be able to detect the breach. You have to be able to respond to the breach, but you need to do all these things in parallel. You can't do one, then the other, then the other. You need to be cleaning out what you detect, trying to make sure that you don't have it going forward, and having a public face to your effort. All these things need to go on at the same time. And you understand that by bringing in people who do this every day, all day. The other aspect to it now is there is a market in the insurance. There is cybersecurity insurance, basically breach insurance that companies are procuring. You will need to bring in law firms. A lot of the law firms are specializing in incident response because there are liability and legal aspects to it. So when you look at a response, it's not just us security guys in there typing on keyboards anymore. There are a lot of softer pieces. There's a lot of, the face of the organization. And people want to see that you know what you're doing.
We've learned over time that from the time that a breach has happened until it has been detected by an agency or a company could be several months, if not longer. Exactly.
Yes.
How do we accelerate that detection and learn about these things sooner so that we can get back to a normal state as quickly as possible?
Great question. So I refer to it as dwell time. How long were they in there before you found them? And for years, the most important number to us security people was 0. How many bad guys got in? 0. How much data did we lose? 0. Right? That was the big number. Now the number is what you just described, dwell time. How long were they in doing bad things before we caught them? And that is how we grade, good, better, best. So organizations that catch, detect, respond within weeks is pretty good, because of the complexity of some of these, the malware and the viruses that they're fighting and the hackers that they're fighting off. When you find these organizations where you see that they've been in there for a year or more, that's really damaging, because it'll be really hard to figure out what they were actually doing. And typically, if they're in there for that long, they weren't just looking for credit card data or customer data. They were looking for intellectual property, research and development, things like that. So when you look at some of the different breaches that have gone on in the federal government, they're really looking for specific information, and there's different uses for that.
And we talked about the insurance piece and the PR piece. What about some of the more technical aspects of this to really get a company or an agency back to normal? And I'm sure you have a lot of experience with this in your time in government.
Yes.
What goes into that?
So you need a support from the top up, and that is one of the things that oftentimes is lacking. Is you don't have, everybody will pay lip service. Security is one of my top initiatives. However, the security budget's been cut back at the same level as the CIO's budget has been cut back. So clearly it's not your number one priority. It's done around 8 or 9. So when you look at these different breaches, people really need to understand that everyone is different. There's no one formula to respond to a breach. So when I was in the federal government, I got to live through WikiLeaks and deal with some of that, which is very different than an overseas hack or compromise. And so the understanding that breaches can come from the inside, they can come from the outside, they're all damaging. They're all damaging. And so we've really had to change our mindset from trying to build our moats, our castles, our walls, more firewalls, more things to keep people out, and really shift to data analytics, being able to dive into not just keeping the bad guys out, but what are my employees doing? Why is this employee printing on a Saturday? He never prints on a Saturday. Why is this employee in here at 2 a.m. in the morning? He's not supposed to be there. Looking at the behaviors and the behavioral analytics of what your employees are doing. But you also have to be very careful with that because there's lots of privacy concerns, especially in the federal government where when you log on to a federal system, you click the acknowledgement banner that says, we are monitoring everything you do, just to let you know, right? However, there are certain, nuances to, perceptions of privacy in email and different aspects.
A little bit of gray area there, despite the fact that it is put up in front of you on the screen.
Yes, just because I put up a sign that says swim at your own risk does not mean I'm not going to get sued if something happens. Yes, correct. Go ahead.
So that's a great point. Are we in a world now today where we must just accept breaches as reality, or are there other things or other methods that can prevent these sorts of attacks from happening?
So I think we have to accept breaches as a reality. We don't have to accept poor responses, right? So breaches are going to occur. It just is. There is a certain percentage of the bad guys who can get through just about anything. And so the same thing with a club putting it on your car. Will it stop a car thief? No, but maybe it'll make them go to the car behind you, right? Same thing with breaches. There are going to be breaches. And if you look at the organizations and the federal agencies that have been breached, large security operations, lots of technical capabilities, lots of all of these different pieces, yet they were still breached because they're IT systems with data. There are always vulnerabilities. As employees move toward, I want to do work on an iPad, I want to do work from home, I want to do work in these flexible locations, you lose, we don't have a crunchy shell anymore. We're a gummy bear. We're not an M&M anymore, right? And so as we go down that path, you have to make sure that you have the ability to keep an eye on the data. And so what you're seeing in some of the federal agencies, which is really good, and we're seeing it in the commercial as well, but some of the federal agencies are really leading here, is that they're pulling the data in. They're pulling the data in. For years, we wanted to give everybody really powerful desktops. And now we're saying we don't want that anymore. We want all the data held here in this one area, and you can access it from your iPad, thin client, whatever your machine du jour is. So it's agnostic. We don't care what device you use, but we're going to hold the data. And the government has actually been leading in some of those respects. Not all the agencies, but some of them.
We're going to pause here for a short break. My guest today is Matt McCormick, Chief Technology Officer of RSA's Global Public Sector, on today's Cybersecurity and Rapid Response, sponsored by RSA Security. I'm Jason Fornicola, and you're listening to federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.